I still remember the first time I set foot in China. It was the summer of 1999, and the air that clung to me the moment I stepped out of the Beijing Capital Airport was thick, heavy, and foreign. I was a 50-year-old man from America, carrying nothing but a suitcase, a teaching contract, and the kind of restless heart that men my age either smother or indulge. I told myself it was just work, a year abroad, teaching English at a provincial university, a paycheck, and maybe some adventure to fill the empty stretch of my life after my divorce. But from the very first taxi ride into the countryside, watching the flat fields give way to gray apartment blocks and ancient temples half swallowed by neon lights, I felt as though I had been pulled into someone else's dream. The town where I was assigned was small by Chinese standards, but large enough to feel alive at night. The streets were lined with red lanterns swaying above food stalls, their flames reflecting on puddles of soy sauce and oil spilled across the pavement. The smell was intoxicating ginger, garlic, star anise, and something faintly metallic that I never learned to name. Vendors shouted over each other. Scooters cut through the crowd with horns blaring. And somewhere, always, fireworks cracked in the distance. The university gave me a modest apartment near the edge of town, in a building that looked as though it had survived a war. Concrete walls scarred with age, pipes jutting out at odd angles, and a stairwell that smelled of damp laundry. But it was mine. And at night, when I opened the window, I could hear the chanting from the small temple across the alley. The monks' voices rose and fell like waves, and though I couldn't understand the words, they wrapped themselves around me, lulling me into uneasy dreams. That was where I first met her. Her name was Lion. She was in her late 20s, a quiet woman with long black hair, always tied neatly at the back of her neck. She worked at a tea house near the temple, serving customers with a grace that seemed rehearsed, like an old ritual she had perfected. The first time I went in, exhausted from the heat and the constant eyes of strangers, she smiled at me, not the wide, open smile Americans give, but something softer, more reserved, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were trespassing into something sacred. We spoke in broken English and broken Mandarin, stitched together with hand gestures and laughter. Every day after my classes, I found myself drifting to the tea house, as though pulled by a thread I couldn't see. She would pour my tea slowly, the steam curling between us like a living thing. Sometimes she would tell me about her village, about the mountains where her ancestors were buried, about the festivals where red silk covered every doorway. Her voice was low and melodic, carrying secrets that felt older than the town itself. But there were shadows in her words too. When I asked about her family, her eyes clouded and she would change the subject. When I joked about marriage, she grew silent. And once, only once, when I mentioned returning to America, she reached out, touched my hand, and whispered, "If you go, I cannot follow." I thought it was only fear. The fear of distance, of a love that might wither between two continents. I told myself it was natural, that any woman might say such things. But the more time I spent with her, the more I noticed how the villagers looked at us, not with the curiosity I expected, but with pity, sometimes with something close to fear. One evening, I was invited to her family home in a nearby village. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time stone houses with sloping roofs, narrow alleys where chickens scattered before your feet. the air heavy with incense and smoke from wood stoves. Her mother greeted me with polite bows, but her eyes were sharp, searching, as if she were looking through me rather than at me. The dinner was quiet, too quiet. The family spoke in whispers, avoiding my gaze. When I raised my glass of rice wine, her uncle refused to touch his to mine. Only Leon smiled, though even that smile seemed forced. Later that night, as we walked back under the lantern light, I asked her what was wrong. She didn't answer. Instead, she stopped, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "Some marriages are chosen by the living, others by the dead. Do you understand?" I didn't. Not then. I only laughed it off, pretending it was some old superstition, a relic of a culture I could never truly grasp. But deep inside, a seed of unease had been planted. The temple bells rang in the distance, echoing through the night air, and as we walked past the shadowed houses, I thought I saw faces at the windows watching, waiting, as though they already knew where this path would lead me. I never believed I would marry again. At 50, I thought that chapter of my life had closed, sealed by the bitterness of a divorce and the quiet solitude that followed. Yet, in that small Chinese town, under red lanterns swaying in the night air, I found myself standing beside Leon, her hand trembling slightly in mine as her family prepared for a wedding, unlike anything I had ever known. The decision came quickly, almost recklessly. We had known each other for less than a year, but something about her presence filled a hollow space inside me that had been gnawing for years. Her silence, her grace, even her sadness, it drew me in, made me want to protect her, to belong to her world, no matter how foreign it seemed. Her family, however, did not celebrate with the joy I expected. When I announced my proposal, her mother bowed her head, as though accepting something inevitable rather than something joyous. The villagers whispered. Some congratulated us, but their eyes betrayed unease, the same look I had seen the first night in her village. Still, the preparations began, and I allowed myself to be carried by the current, ignoring the chill beneath the surface. The wedding was set for a summer evening, chosen according to the lunar calendar. A monk from the temple muttered over scrolls for hours before declaring the day suitable. I thought it was quaint, a cultural tradition, nothing more. But the way the monk's eyes lingered on me when he spoke, the faint tremor in his hands as he handed the scroll to her mother, it unsettled me. On the day of the ceremony, the village transformed. Red dominated everything. Red banners, red paper, cutouts pasted to doors, red cloth draped over rooftops. Firecrackers exploded in bursts, filling the air with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. A procession formed, led by drummers whose pounding rhythm seemed to echo inside my chest. Then came the sedan chair, a wooden palanquin painted crimson, carried by 4 men dressed in silk robes. Inside, hidden behind a curtain of red gauze, was Leon. Tradition dictated that the groom could not see the bride until she entered the home. I followed the chair, my foreign suit out of place among the flowing silks and embroidered robes. Children pointed at me, laughing, but the adults stared with a silence that pressed against my back. When we reached her family's courtyard, the rituals began, bowing to the heavens, bowing to the earth, bowing to her ancestors. Each movement precise, rehearsed, heavy with meaning I couldn't grasp. They tied a red sash between us, binding our hands together as a symbol of unity. The monk chanted, his voice deep and resonant, carrying words that seemed older than the walls around us. Finally, she emerged from the sedan chair. She wore a traditional qipao, bright red silk embroidered with golden phoenixes. A red veil covered her face, thin enough that I could see the outline of her features beneath. She moved with slow, deliberate steps, her head bowed. When she stood beside me, her hand cold in mine, I felt an unease ripple through me. The ceremony continued late into the night. We feasted on fish and dumplings, drank rice wine until my head swam, and listened to the relentless pounding of drums that seemed to drive deeper and deeper into my skull. Leanne spoke little, only offering small nods and smiles when prompted. It was as though she were not fully present, as though part of her lingered elsewhere. When the guests began to leave and the lanterns burned low, I found her sitting alone in the corner of the courtyard. Her veil had been lifted, revealing her pale face under the flickering light. She looked beautiful, almost unreal. The kind of beauty that makes you hesitate, unsure if it is meant for you. I sat beside her, reached for her hand, and whispered, "We made it. We're married now." She looked at me then, truly looked. Her dark eyes fixed on mine, and in a voice so soft, I almost thought I imagined it. She said, "If I die before you, promise me you will still keep me as your wife." The words chilled me, slicing through the warmth of the wine. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Don't talk like that. We've just started our life together." But she didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just repeated it, her tone heavier this time, more insistent. "Promise me." I hesitated. My heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was only nerves, a strange custom I didn't understand, some old superstition passed down in her family. So I nodded. "I promise." Her shoulders relaxed then, as though a weight had been lifted. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Then nothing can ever separate us." At that moment, the last of the lanterns sputtered out. The courtyard fell into shadow, and in the sudden darkness, I thought I saw movement behind us, an outline, faint and pale, standing just beyond the reach of the dying light. When I turned my head, it was gone. Later that night, as we prepared for bed in the small house her family had given us, I noticed something strange. In the corner of the room hung our wedding portrait, painted hastily that very afternoon. The two of us stood side by side, her veil lifted, my arm around her shoulders. But in the background, barely visible, was another figure, a pale shape, blurred, like a person caught moving in the moment of exposure. It stood directly behind her. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, a flaw in the paint. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A face without features, a body without form, hovering over my bride. That night, when I lay beside her in bed, her skin cool against mine, I couldn't shake the thought. Her words echoed in my mind. "If I die before you, promise me you will still keep me as your wife." And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I wondered what exactly had I promised. Marriage, I thought, would settle me. After the ceremony, after the feasting, in the long night of wine and drums, I told myself that the strange whispers, the pale shape in the wedding portrait, even her chilling request about death, all of it could be explained. Culture, superstition, nerves. The first weeks felt almost ordinary. We moved into a small house at the edge of the village, built of stone and timber, its courtyard shaded by a persimmon tree. Every morning, I woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of incense drifting from the temple. Lian cooked rice congee with pickled vegetables, her movements slow and graceful, her hair tied back with a red ribbon. At times, she looked so alive, so present, that I convinced myself the unease in me was only the residue of being foreign in a world I didn't fully understand. But the village never let me forget. People stared when we walked together through the market. Old women whispered and averted their eyes. Even the butcher, who had always greeted me with boisterous cheer, grew quiet when he saw her at my side. There was something unsaid between them all, a silence that grew heavier with each passing day. Still, in our little home, there were moments of peace. We laughed over my broken Mandarin. We walked by the river at dusk, the water reflecting the red of the lanterns strung across the bridge. At night, she would curl against me, her skin always cool, as though the warmth of the summer air could not touch her. I told myself I was lucky that I had been given a second chance at love, even if the rest of the world disapproved. Then came the night of her death. It was early September, the air thick with the last of the summer heat. We had been sitting in the courtyard after dinner, the sky heavy with stars, when she began to hum. It was a low, mournful tune, unfamiliar to me, though it carried the rhythm of something ancient. I asked her what it was. "A wedding song," she said softly, but the way she sang it, it sounded more like a dirge. I tried to lighten the moment, teasing her about how serious she looked. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't change. Then, suddenly, mid-sentence, her hand slipped from mine. I turned to her. Her lips had parted, but no breath came. Her body went rigid, her eyes wide open, staring at the sky. "Lian." I shook her shoulders, panic flooding me. She gasped once sharp, shallow, then collapsed forward into my arms. Her body was limp, cold. I screamed for help. Neighbors rushed in, their lanterns casting trembling light across the courtyard. Someone shouted for the village doctor, an old man with trembling hands who pressed his ear to her chest, his fingers to her wrist. He looked at me with hollow eyes and shook his head. "She is gone," he whispered. I could not accept it. We had just married. She had been laughing not an hour before. I pressed my hands against her chest, tried to breathe air into her lungs, anything to hold her here. But her skin was already losing its color, her lips turning a shade of blue that no warmth could revive. Her mother arrived then, her cries piercing the night. She pushed me aside, gathering her daughter's body against her chest, rocking back and forth like she was a child again. The neighbors murmured prayers, some looking away, some staring at me as if I had brought this curse upon them. The funeral was arranged quickly, too quickly. Her body was washed and dressed in a white robe, her long hair combed and braided with strands of red silk. They laid her in a wooden coffin painted black, its surface marked with talismans drawn in red ink. The monks chanted day and night, their voices a relentless tide that filled every corner of the house. I stood at her side, numb, watching incense coils burn themselves to ash. I wanted to touch her face one last time, to kiss her cold lips, but her family would not let me near. The living must not cling to the dead, her uncle said. his voice sharp, final. On the third day, the coffin was carried to the family plot outside the village. A narrow path wound through fields of millet to a hillside marked with ancient stones. The villagers walked in solemn procession, the sound of drums slow and heavy, like the beating of a heart about to stop. They lowered her into the ground as I stood frozen, unable to breathe. The priest sprinkled rice wine over the coffin, chanting words I could not understand. Her mother wept until her voice broke, her body shaking so violently 2 men had to hold her upright. When the last shovelful of earth covered the coffin, the villagers began to leave. But I stayed, staring at the fresh mound of soil. My wife, my bride of only weeks, was gone, and I had not even been allowed to say goodbye. That night, I lay alone in our bed, the wedding portrait still hanging on the wall. The pale figure in the background seemed sharper now, clearer, its faceless head tilted toward me, as though mocking my grief. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard it. 3 soft knocks at the door. Slow, deliberate. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. No one should be here. Everyone in the village knew she was gone, that I was alone. The knocks came again, louder. I rose, trembling, and crossed the room. My hand hovered over the latch, sweat slick on my palm. I almost called out, almost asked who it was, but some instinct deep, primal, told me not to. Instead, I leaned close, pressing my ear to the wood, and from the other side, faint but unmistakable, came her voice. "Open the door." "Husband, it's me." I did not open the door that night. I stood there, hand frozen on the latch, my ear pressed to the wood. The voice was hers, Leon's voice, soft, melodic, unmistakable. I had heard it 100 times in the tea house, in the courtyard, whispered against my shoulder in the dark. But she was dead. I had watched them lower her into the ground with my own eyes. My heart thundered as I whispered, "No, no," and stepped back from the door. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the house was utterly silent. Then, faintly, the sound of footsteps moved away, receding into the night. I sank to the floor, my body trembling, unable to reconcile the grief in my chest with the terror in my bones. Sleep did not come. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the wedding portrait on the wall. Her painted smile seemed sharper now, unnatural. And in the background, the blurred figure, I could swear it had shifted closer. The next evening, I avoided returning home until late, hoping exhaustion would drown my thoughts. But when I stepped into the courtyard, I froze. The door was already open, and inside, standing in the dim glow of a single oil lamp, was Leon. She looked exactly as she had before she died. Her black hair neatly tied back, her kippah bright against the shadows. She turned her head slowly toward me, and her lips curved into that soft, reserved smile I had fallen in love with. "You're late," she said, her voice calm, almost playful. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. My first thought was to run. My second, shamefully, was to fall into her arms. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, words clawing at my throat. You're gone," I whispered. She tilted her head, as though the word confused her. "I told you. Husband, nothing can separate us." Her hand reached out. I should have recoiled. But grief is a strange chain. I stepped forward, and when her fingers brushed mine, I felt it cold. Yeah, colder than any living hand should be, but solid. Real. Not misted. Not a dream. She was here. The days that followed blurred together. I did not tell the villagers. How could I? Who would believe me? And those who might believe. I feared what they would do. So I kept our secret, living with a woman who had already been buried. At first, it was almost as if nothing had changed. She cooked. She swept the floors. She sat with me in the evenings. If not for the absence of warmth in her body, I could almost convince myself the funeral had been some fever dream. But little by little, the cracks began to show. I noticed she never ate. She would prepare meals for me, laying them out with care, but never touched a bite herself. When I pressed her, she smiled and said, "I am already full." Her skin grew paler each day, as though the blood had drained from her veins. Her lips lost their color. Her eyes grew darker at the edges. At night, when I woke, I would sometimes find her sitting upright beside me, staring at the wall, murmuring words I didn't understand. The villagers knew something was wrong. They saw her. Some even greeted her, but their faces twisted with unease, their voices dropping to whispers after we passed. Children hid behind their mothers, peeking out wide-eyed. Old men spat in the dust when we walked by. One evening, while walking back from the market, I caught sight of my reflection in a shop window. I froze. Beside me, clear as day, was my own figure. But where she stood, there was nothing, only empty space. I turned to her in panic. She smiled, oblivious. That night, I dreamed of her coffin. I dreamed of claw marks on the inside of the wood, long and frantic, gouged deep into the grain. I woke drenched in sweat, the smell of soil clinging to my skin. When I told her about the dream, she placed her cold hand on my cheek. "Husband," she whispered, "don't dream of the grave. I am here with you forever." I wanted to believe her. God help me. I did believe her. Because the alternative that I was living with something that should not exist was too much to bear. But then came the night I saw the truth. I woke to the sound of chanting, not from the temple across the alley, but inside our house. I rose quietly, heart hammering, and followed the sound to the main room. There, in the faint glow of dying candles, Leanne knelt before the ancestral altar. Her white funeral robe clung to her shoulders, though I had never seen it since the burial. Her hair hung loose, tangled, falling over her face. She was speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Low, guttural, rhythmic. The sound made the hairs on my neck rise. And then, as I watched, her head snapped toward me. Her eyes were black, entirely black, like two pools of ink. "Husband," she hissed, her voice no longer soft, but hollow, echoing as if from underground. "You promised." My legs gave out. I stumbled backward, my hand catching the edge of the doorframe. My mind screamed to flee, but my heart, my cursed, grieving heart kept me rooted. The next morning, she was back to herself, smiling, quiet, graceful, as though the night before had never happened. But I knew that whatever shared my bed, whatever touched my hand, whatever whispered my name in the dark, it was not the same woman I had married. It was something else, and it was not going to let me go. At first, I tried to convince myself it was stress, jet lag, grief. wine. The constant pull between two worlds, anything but the truth, that had begun to gnaw at the edge of my sanity. My wife was back from the grave, and I was living with her. But denial has limits, and mine shattered quickly. It began with the mirrors. One morning, while shaving in the small bathroom, I noticed something strange. Lynn stood behind me, brushing her hair. Her reflection, however, did not. The glass showed only me, my tired eyes, my trembling hands, but where she should have been, there was nothing but the empty wall. I spun around, heart pounding. She smiled at me as though nothing was wrong, tying her hair with a strip of red silk. "Why do you look so frightened, husband?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I only stared at her, then at the mirror again. Still nothing. That night, I covered the bathroom mirror with a cloth. Then came the hair. At first, just a strand or two on the pillow. I thought nothing of it. But soon, clumps began to appear. Long black strands tangled across the sheets, stuck to the comb, clogging the drain. Once, as she bent to pick up a dropped bowl, "Take it." I saw a patch of bare scalp beneath her glossy hairline, raw and pale, like the skin of something freshly unearthed. She noticed me looking and quickly adjusted her ribbon, smiling as though to distract me. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then, the smell, at first faint, like damp soil clinging to clothes after rain. But each day it grew stronger, filling the house with the stench of earth and rot. No matter how many incense sticks I lit, how many windows I opened, the smell lingered. It clung to her kippah, to her skin, to the very walls. One night, I woke to find her sitting at the edge of the bed, her back to me. Her funeral robe hung loose from her shoulders, and her long hair, thinning now, fell forward in strings. She was humming that same mournful wedding song. When I reached out, my fingers brushed her hand and recoiled instantly. Her skin was damp, not with sweat, but with soil, cold, wet, packed earth. I stumbled backward, my chest heaving. She turned, her face calm, her smile gentle. "What is it?" "Husband." I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. The next day, I went to the village elder, a stooped man with clouded eyes who always sat by the temple steps. I asked him, in broken Mandarin, about spirits, about ghosts returning. His face tightened. "You must not speak of this," he whispered. "The dead belong to the dead. If she walks with you, it is because something has been broken, and something will be taken in return." "What do I do?" I asked desperately. He shook his head. "You cannot undo a promise." I returned home in a daze. She was waiting for me at the door, her pale face tilted in curiosity. "Where did you go?" she asked. "To the market." I lied. Her eyes lingered on mine a moment too long, as if she could see through me. Then she smiled. Good. I was lonely. That night, the cracks widened. I woke to the sound of scratching, not from the walls, not from outside, but from beneath the bed. A steady, relentless scrape of nails against wood. My blood froze. Slowly, I leaned over the edge. There, in the darkness, a pale hand clawed at the floorboards. Her hand, yet she was lying beside me. I jerked upright. heart racing. When I looked down again, the hand was gone. She stirred, opening her eyes, and whispered, "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I croaked. But I knew it was not nothing. I knew that the thing beside me, the thing wearing my wife's face, was unraveling. The final blow came a week later. I had gone to fetch water from the well. When I returned, she was standing before the ancestral altar, her hair loose, her robe stained with soil. She was holding our wedding portrait, but the portrait had changed. The pale figure in the background was no longer blurred. It was clear now, a corpse-white man with hollow sockets where eyes should be, his skeletal hand resting on Leon's shoulder. And worse, where I should have been standing in the picture, there was only darkness. She turned to me, holding the portrait close to her chest. "You see," she whispered, her voice both hers and not hers. "We are already together. The others are waiting." I dropped the water jar. It shattered at my feet, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She smiled then, her lips stretching too wide, the skin at the corners cracking slightly. And for the first time, I wanted to run, not from grief, not from loneliness, but from her, from my wife, from the grave that had followed me home. I could not take it anymore. The mirrors, with no reflection, the clumps of black hair, the smell of wet earth that clung to her clothes and skin like a second shadow, the wedding portrait that seemed to change each time I looked at it, and above all, the way her eyes lingered on me now, as though measuring how much of me remained. One evening, after another sleepless night of hearing scratching beneath the bed, I walked to her mother's house. The villagers avoided me, their faces shuddered, their conversations falling silent as I passed. A boy tugged at his grandmother's sleeve, pointing at me, whispering a word I did not understand. The old woman spat on the ground and turned away. When I reached the house, her mother was outside, kneeling by a basin, scrubbing clothes. She froze when she saw me, her hands tightening around the fabric. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she gestured for me to follow her inside. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. Shadows swayed across the walls, heavy with the scent of incense and something bitter. She closed the door, bolted it, and faced me. "You've seen her," she said flatly. I swallowed hard. She's here, with me." Her mother's face tightened, grief and anger battling in her expression. "I told them this would happen. I told her uncle. I told the monk. But they let it go. And now, you have brought her back." "I don't understand," I whispered. "She died. I buried her. And yet," her mother cut me off with a sharp shake of her head. "No, you married her. And marriage is a chain. Even death cannot break." Her words struck me like a blow. She sat heavily on a stool, her hands trembling. Leanne was born under a shadowed star. The fortune tellers said her life would be short, her soul restless. To keep balance, the family arranged a spirit marriage for her and Yin Hun. The word was unfamiliar, but the weight of it chilled me. "A marriage," she continued, "not to a living man, but to the dead. A boy from our village who died before his wedding. His family needed a bride to calm his spirit. We promised Leon." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "You mean you were going to marry her to a corpse?" Her eyes flashed. "To his spirit. It is our custom. The dead must have companionship, or they wander, and the living The living must pay respect to fate. She leaned forward, her voice low, urgent. But then you came, a foreigner, bold and blind. You stole her from that path. You broke the bond. Her hands clenched into fists. So now, the spirits will take what is owed. She cannot rest. She will not rest. And you, husband, will not remain among the living for long. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, she came back because she loves me, because I promised her. Her mother's expression twisted into something between pity and fury. Yeah, that promise was the key. You bound yourself to her. But do you not see? It is not love that holds her here. It is hunger. Each night she lingered. She takes from you your warmth, your breath, your years. I thought of my reflection in the shop window, where she had not appeared. I thought of how weak I felt lately, how my skin had grown pale, my hands trembling with fatigue. I thought of the nights I woke gasping, as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. No, I whispered. Her mother reached for me, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. There may still be a way, but it is dangerous. The dead do not release what they have claimed easily. What way? I demanded, desperate. She hesitated. You must burn the wedding garments, the red veil, the sash that tied you together. Call her true name while the fire consumes them. Only then can the chain be broken. Her eyes darkened. But know this if you do. She will come to you in her true form. And what you see may follow you for the rest of your life. I left her house in a daze, her words echoing in my skull. The night had fallen, the street silent, the lantern swaying as though stirred by a breath I could not feel. When I returned home, she was waiting for me in the courtyard. She wore her red wedding kippah, though I had not seen it since the ceremony. It was torn now, frayed at the sleeves, dirt clinging to the hem. Her hair hung loose, strands missing, patches of pale scalp glimmering in the lamplight. Husband, she said softly, her lips curling into that gentle, practiced smile. Where did you go? My throat tightened. I wanted to lie, to say the market again, but her eyes, dark, unblinking, watched me too closely. I went to your mother's, I admitted. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, her smile widened. You shouldn't have done that. The lamp flickered. The shadows stretched long across the courtyard. And in that instant, I felt it, the weight of the promise. The invisible chain around my neck, pulling tighter. The night after I visited her mother, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leon's face, not as it had been when we first met, radiant with quiet grace, but pale, broken, soil clinging to her skin like the earth was still trying to pull her back. Her mother's words circled in my mind. You cannot undo a promise. And yet, she had also spoken of a way out. Burn the garments. Call her true name. Break the chain. But could I? When I turned, she was lying beside me, her body cold as always, her lips parted slightly as though she were breathing. For a moment, in the half-darkness, I could almost believe she was alive. Almost. Then her eyes opened, wide, staring directly into mine. Husband, she whispered, do you still love me? The question pierced me deeper than any knife. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to cling to the comfort of her presence, no matter how twisted it had become. But my voice faltered. I don't know anymore. Her face shifted, sadness passing over it like a shadow. She sat up slowly, her long black hair spilling forward, hiding her face. "You promised," she murmured. "In life, in death, you are mine." Her hand reached for me. I flinched, but she grasped my wrist tightly, her grip like iron. Her nails dug into my skin, drawing blood. "You would leave me, break our bond. Do you think the dead forgive betrayal?" Her voice deepened as she spoke, echoing with something older, darker. I tore my hand free, stumbling out of bed, gasping. "You're not her. Not anymore. Whatever you are, it isn't Leon." For the first time, her face twisted in rage, her lips peeled back, exposing teeth too sharp, too white. Her eyes were black pools, bottomless. "You dare say that?" She hissed. "I gave you my vow. I gave you my life, and I gave you my death. You belong to me, husband, even if I must drag you down with me." The walls shuddered with her words. The oil lamp flickered violently, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. I ran out of the house, into the courtyard, the night air heavy and damp. Behind me, I heard her bare feet slapping against the stones. Following, "Husband," she cried, "don't run from me. You swore." I fled to the temple at the edge of the village, the only place where light still flickered. The monks were chanting their midnight prayers, their voices rising and falling like waves. I stumbled inside, collapsing at the feet of the elder monk. "She's come back," I gasped. "My wife, she's not at rest. She won't let me go." The monk's face remained still, but his eyes betrayed recognition. He gestured for the others to continue their chants, then leaned close. "You should not have made the promise," he said softly. "I didn't know," I pleaded. "I thought it was just words. Words bind the living and the dead alike," he replied, "especially on a wedding night." I grasped his robe desperately. "Her mother said I could break it, burn the garments, call her true name. Tell me what to do." The monk hesitated, then shook his head. "If you do this, she will not leave quietly. She will show you her true form, and once you see the dead as they are, you will never be free." His words chilled me, but what choice did I have? I returned home just before dawn. The house was silent, the air heavy with the stench of soil. She was waiting in the main room, seated calmly at the altar, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore her wedding chipao again, once bright red, now torn, faded, stained with earth. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "You came back," she whispered. My chest tightened. Despite everything, the fear, the horror part of me, still longed for her, still remembered the way she poured tea, the way her smile softened when she thought no one was watching. But then I remembered the portrait, the missing reflection, the soil beneath her nails, and I knew, "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "You're not meant to be here." Her smile vanished. Slowly, she rose, her body moving with a stiffness that betrayed what she truly was. Her hair shifted, and I saw patches of her scalp bare, raw. Her lips cracked as she spoke. "You promised me forever, and now you choose to betray me." Her voice grew louder, filling the room, shaking the walls. "You are mine, husband, mine in life, mine in death. If you try to leave, I will take you with me." She stepped closer, her hands outstretched. Her nails had lengthened, sharpened, glistening like bone. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. I stumbled back, my hand brushing against the bundle of garments hidden under the altar. The red sash, the veil, the pieces her mother had given me. I knew what I had to do, but could I? Behind her fury, I still saw glimpses of the woman I had loved. The way she tilted her head, the softness in her face, the memory of her voice saying my name in the tea house. And now she stood before me, demanding my choice, to love her or to be free of her. The final choice. I clutched the bundle of garments beneath the altar, the red veil and sash, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. My heart thundered, every instinct screaming at me to set them aflame, to sever the bond before it dragged me into the earth. But before I could move, she stepped closer. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, her eyes dark and glistening like wet stones. Dirt clung to her bare feet, crumbling onto the floor as she moved. The air thickened with the smell of rot and damp soil. "You're mine," she whispered, her voice both tender and venomous. "You promised." Then she lunged. Her fingers, sharp as claws, sank into my arm with inhuman strength. She pulled me toward the courtyard with a force that made my knees buckle. I tried to resist, but she was stronger, so much stronger than she should have been. "Come with me," she hissed. "Come where you belong." The night outside was heavy and still, the moon hidden behind clouds. She dragged me toward the path that wound past the persimmon tree, toward the fields beyond. My bare feet scraped against the stones as I fought, gasping, but her grip was iron. We reached the edge of the burial ground. Lanterns flickered faintly, casting trembling light over the stones. My chest seized when I realized where she was leading me, straight to the fresh mound of earth that covered her coffin. "No," I screamed, twisting against her hold. "You're dead. You don't belong here." She turned to me then, her face inches from mine. For the first time, the mask slipped fully. Her skin sagged, gray and cracked, like clay left too long in the sun. Her eyes were hollow pits, crawling with shadows. Her mouth opened wide, wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of blackened teeth that clicked together like bones. "Husband," she moaned, her voice echoing from deep within her chest, layered with voices that were not hers. "Forever means forever." She shoved me down into the soil. My hands sank into the loose dirt, the smell of earth filling my lungs. She clawed at the ground with feral urgency, digging, pulling aside clumps of dirt with unnatural speed. The wooden coffin beneath creaked as soil slid off its lid. And then I realized she wasn't dragging me to her grave. She was opening it. The coffin lid cracked, splitting under her clawed hands. The smell that rose up was suffocating, a mixture of decay and something sour, metallic. "Inside," she rasped. Together, I kicked, clawed, screamed. My nails tore against the earth. The soil filled my mouth, choking me as her hands pressed me down, closer and closer to the gaping coffin. For a brief second, the moon broke through the clouds, casting pale light across the grave. And in that light, I saw her fully. She was no longer my Leon. Her hair was nearly gone, strands clinging to her scalp in patches. Her flesh hung loose, streaked with dirt and worms. Her chest was sunken, her ribs jutting through the thin fabric of her kipau, and her eyes those black, endless pits, burned with hunger. She bent close, her rotting lips brushing my ear. You will breathe your last breath here. With me, you will feed me. And when the earth closes above us, you will never leave again. Her words froze my blood. My strength was fading, the soil closing in. I thought of my home in America, of my wasted years, of the loneliness that had led me here. And I thought of the promise I had made in ignorance, the vow that had become a noose. I reached into my robe, my hand brushing against the flint and candle I had taken from the temple. With the last of my strength, I struck the spark, igniting the bundle of garments, the red veil, the sash that had bound us together. Flames leapt into the night, devouring the silk, crackling with unnatural heat. Her scream split the air, piercing, unearthly. She recoiled, her body twisting, her face contorting in rage and agony. Smoke rose around us, the fire casting her in stark relief. No longer my bride, but a corpse dragged from the grave. You dare betray me, she shrieked. Her voice was no longer human. It was a chorus of the dead, every syllable vibrating through my bones. The ground shook beneath me. The grave yawned wider, as though the earth itself demanded my surrender. Her clawed hands shot out once more, reaching for me even as her form began to unravel in the firelight. I screamed her true name over and over, as her mother had told me. Lian, Lian, Lian. Her body convulsed, jerking violently. Her eyes widened, and for the briefest instant, I saw her again, the woman I had loved. Her face soft, her lips trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then her flesh split apart. Her form crumbled into ash and soil, scattering into the night air. The fire roared higher, consuming the last of the garments. The earth groaned, then stilled. The night fell silent. I collapsed beside the grave, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. The smell of burned silk and wet soil clung to me. The flames sputtered out, leaving only glowing embers in the dirt. And the coffin, her coffin, was sealed again, untouched, as though it had never been opened. I lay there until dawn, staring at the sky, waiting for her voice to return. It never did, but in the silence, I wondered, had I freed myself, or had I only pushed her deeper into the shadows, waiting, watching, until the day I finally joined her. The first light of dawn crept across the burial ground, turning the mist above the fields into ribbons of gold. I was still there, slumped against the mound of earth that covered her coffin, my body trembling, my throat raw from screaming her name. The fire had died, leaving only ashes and the faint stench of burned silk. My hands were blistered where I had held the flames too long, and dirt clung to every crease of my skin. I felt hollow, as if some part of me had been torn out and buried with her. For hours, I didn't move. I was afraid to. Finally, when the sun rose high enough to scatter the shadows, I staggered back toward the village. The streets were quiet, villagers peering at me from behind shuttered windows. I must have looked mad, covered in soil, my clothes torn, my eyes wide and bloodshot. A foreigner who had wandered too far into things he didn't understand. When I reached our house, I half expected her to be there waiting at the door, her smile faint, her eyes dark, but the courtyard was empty. The air, for the first time in weeks, smelled clean. I stepped inside. It was as though she had never returned. The oil lamp was upright on the table, its flame long extinguished. The bedding was neatly folded, without a trace of her presence. Even the smell of damp earth had lifted, replaced by the faint sweetness of incense drifting from the neighbor's home. I told myself it was over, that I had done it, that burning the garments had set her free. But I couldn't shake the silence. It was too deep, too heavy. That night, I lay alone in the bed where she had once curled against me. I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep to come, and in the stillness, I thought I heard it the faintest whisper, just above my ear. "Thank you." My eyes flew open. The room was empty. I sat up, my chest heaving, staring into the shadows. For hours, I stayed awake, listening, but nothing more came. The days that followed blurred together. I tried to return to work at the university, but the students stared at me with wide eyes, whispering behind their hands. The villagers avoided me entirely, as though I carried a curse they dared not touch. Even her mother would not meet my gaze. "You did what had to be done," she told me once, her voice low, her eyes wet with grief. "But do not think she is gone. The dead do not vanish. They wait." Her words haunted me more than any scream. I left the village soon after. I told myself it was for my own safety, that I could not stay where the memories pressed on me from every corner. But the truth was simpler. I could not bear to walk past the tea house, the river, the persimmon tree without seeing her there, smiling faintly, her cool hand brushing mine. I returned to America, carrying nothing but my suitcase and the scars on my arms. To anyone who asked, I said my wife had died suddenly, and I could not remain in China. They nodded with sympathy, but I saw the flicker of disbelief in their eyes. Life resumed. In a way, I taught again. I shopped for groceries. I passed strangers on the street who did not know my story, who did not whisper behind their hands. And yet, the silence followed me. At night, I still dream of her. Sometimes, she is as she was when I first met her, pouring tea. Her hair tied back neatly, her smile soft and reserved. Other nights, she is as she was at the grave, skin sagging, eyes black, her voice echoing from the earth. And always, she asks the same thing. "Do you still love me, husband?" I wake drenched in sweat, my chest tight, the smell of damp soil clinging to me like a second skin. No matter how many times I wash, it lingers. Last night, I rose to fetch water. The kitchen window reflected my tired face, pale and lined. For a moment, I thought I saw her behind me, not fully, just the faint outline of her red veil, swaying in the darkness. When I turned, the room was empty, but on the glass, faint and wet, was the shape of a handprint. I tell myself I am free, that I burned the garments, that I called her name, that I severed the chain. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and the air feels heavy, I hear it again, soft, insistent, brushing against my ear like a breath that is not there. Forever means forever. And I wonder, did I release her? Or did I release her into me? I thought an ocean would be enough to keep her away. After all, what spirit could follow a man halfway across the world? I left China in silence. No farewell ceremony, no goodbyes. I didn't even return to the burial ground to look at her grave one last time. I couldn't. If I had, I think I might never have left. The plane landed in Los Angeles. The terminal filled with fluorescent light and English chatter. Everything felt bright, modern, alive. I told myself I could start over here, thousands of miles from the village, the temple, the grave. But distance means nothing to the dead. My apartment in America was small, clean, and anonymous. No incense, no altars, no red banners fluttering in the wind, just white walls and silence. For the first few weeks, I forced myself to believe I was free. I cooked. I taught my classes. I even laughed once or twice. But at night, the silence pressed in. It started with dreams. I would wake in the early hours, the clock glowing 2:15 a.m., my sheets damp with sweat. In the dream, she was always there, sometimes smiling, sometimes rotting, sometimes nothing but a shadow draped in red silk. And always, she asked the same question: "Do you still love me?" The first time, I whispered yes. The second, I said nothing. By the third, I was screaming when I woke, my voice echoing off the walls. I tried to explain it away as trauma, as guilt, as the weight of promises broken. But then came the small things. My bathroom mirror fogging when I hadn't taken a shower. The faint smell of damp earth seeping from my closet. Long strands of black hair coiled in the sink. Though my own hair is gray and cropped short, I stopped sleeping. I kept lights on at all hours. Students whispered about how pale I looked, how distracted. One evening, I came home late. The sun had just set, the city buzzing outside. I opened the door to my apartment and froze. On the table, in the center of the room, lay a single red veil. Folded neatly, my chest tightened, my knees nearly giving way. I had burned it. I had watched it crumble into ash in that graveyard. But here it was, waiting for me, clean and bright as the day I first lifted it from her face. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I backed into the hallway, slamming the door shut. I spent the night in my car, staring at the windows, waiting for movement. None came. The next morning, when I gathered the courage to return, the veil was gone, the table bare. I told myself I imagined it. But in the corner of the room, faint in the dust, was a handprint, small, delicate, pressed into the wood. Weeks have passed since then. I no longer keep track of the days. Each night I lie in bed, listening, waiting. Sometimes I hear nothing but the hum of the city. Sometimes I hear 3 soft knocks at the door, slow, deliberate. I never open it, because I know what I'll hear if I do. Her voice, whispering through the wood, calling me husband. And every time, my chest aches with the memory of the promise I made in a courtyard lit by red lanterns. If I die before you, promise me you will still keep me as your wife. I promised, and promises are chains. So now I wait, not for freedom, not for peace, but for the moment I am too tired to resist. When the knocks come, and I finally answer, when I finally see her standing there, her veil swaying, her lips cracked, but smiling, and she will say, as she always does in my dreams, forever means forever, and I will follow, because I already know some vows cannot be broken, no matter how many oceans lie between the living and the dead.